The whole town stood behind Kwang's line, not because they had been ordered to stay there, though the order had been given clearly and without room for argument. They stood there because Do-gwang had spent 4 years earning the kind of authority that doesn't require a raised voice. He walked the line one final time that morning, checking faces the way Do-jin checked tolerances, looking for the gap between what was said and what was true. When he was satisfied, he turned to face the engine and spoke to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone at once. Line holds, everybody behind it, no exceptions, not for history, not for anybody. He paused, and when he continued, his voice had dropped a register. The words meant more for himself than the crowd. Twin valves, the melt plug, Pyo's worst number proof twice over, all checked this morning with my own eye. Whatever she does today, no one gets hurt watching her do it. That part's mine, and it's handled. The rest is yours. Do-jin looked at him for a moment. 4 years of mornings behind them, and Kwang still said it that way. The rest is yours. As if safety and engineering were two different trades that had agreed to share a building. Maybe they were. Then let's find out what she is, Do-jin said. He turned to the engine. 4 years, Kwang. All right, little fire. Let's see if you want to live. She did not want to live, not at first. The first attempt caught and died inside 3 strokes. The second ran longer, 7, 8, before the rhythm collapsed and the cylinder went silent. By the 12th attempt, Mokje was wiping his face with a rag that had long since stopped being useful for wiping anything, his expression cycling through frustration and something closer to genuine bewilderment. 12 strokes that time, and then dead again. He turned to face the others, the rag hanging from his fist. The timing's right, the fuel's good, Cho's plunger isn't leaking a drop, so why won't she keep going? She catches like she means it and then just gives up. What are we missing, teacher? Kyo Eun-ha had been standing very still, watching the engine the way she watched everything, not looking at it so much as listening to it through her eyes. She spoke without urgency. It is not the timing. I have moved it every hair it has. She let that settle before continuing. The fault is not in when we light it. It is in something that changes between the 3rd stroke and the 15th. Something that is fine at the start and then is not. Think. What is different about the engine after a dozen strokes than before the first one? The question hung in the air. Do-jin had already been turning it over, and when the answer arrived, it arrived whole, the way the right answers always did, not as a discovery, but as a recognition, something that had been true all along, and was only now being named. It's the cold, Taeho. That's what changes. He crossed to the forge master, speaking quickly, the shape of the problem clear now that he had it. The cylinder's cold iron drinks the compression heat faster than the squeeze makes it, so after a few strokes it can't light the next charge and dies. It can't stay lit long enough to warm itself, and it can't warm itself without staying lit. It's chasing its own tail and losing. Taeho had already reached for a lamp before Do-jin finished speaking. He was a man who understood heat the way Do-jin understood fit, not as a concept, but as a physical fact that lived in the hands and the forearms and the particular quality of light coming off a surface. He crouched and set the lamp beneath the cylinder head with the unhurried competence of someone who had done the equivalent 10,000 times in a different context. Then we give it a head start on the heat, he said, watching the lamp settle. Same as you'd warm a forge before you trust it with good steel. He straightened slowly. 40 years I've known one thing in my bones. Cold iron fights you, and warm iron works with you. A cold start's the hardest start. So don't start her cold. They waited. The lamp burned. The iron drank the heat at its own pace, indifferent to urgency, and Do-jin stood with his hands at his sides and did not rush it. There was nothing to do but wait, and let the warmth move through the metal the way it always had, the way it always would, regardless of what anyone needed from it. When Taeho nodded, they tried again. The catch was different this time. Anyone who had been present for the previous 12 attempts would have felt it immediately, not louder, but steadier, a rhythm that instead of fraying at the edges seemed to find itself and settle in. Stroke 4, stroke 7, stroke 10, 11, 12, and still going, the cadence holding, the cylinder warm enough now to sustain what it had started. Mokjae reached for the drive belt and threw it off. She's holding, the belt's off, and she's still going, she's running on her own. His voice broke upward into something that wasn't quite a shout, and wasn't quite a sob. Teacher, she's alive. Listen to her pound. Nobody's touching her, and she won't stop. Do-jin heard it. He heard it the way you hear a sound you have been listening for so long that when it finally arrives you almost don't trust it. You wait one more beat to be sure, and then one more, and then the certainty arrives and there is nothing to do with it but let it through. Something broke open in his face. He would not have been able to describe it afterward. He was not sure he tried. She runs. The words came out quietly, and then something shifted, and they came out differently. Say she runs. 4 years, that's the heart, that's the whole thing beating. He was moving toward the engine without deciding to move, and he stopped himself at the line, Kwang's line, which held even now, even for this. He stood at the edge of it and looked at the thing that was running on its own power, on grown fuel and compressed air, and the self-made heat of its own prior strokes, and he said, "Hello, little fire. Hello. I built you in another life, and I built you again in this one. Welcome. God, welcome." The noise around him was enormous, and he barely heard it. He was aware of it the way you are aware of weather, present, surrounding, real. But the center of his attention was the engine, its rhythm, the particular sound of iron meeting iron at a cadence that meant the tolerances were holding, that the fit was true, that 4 years of process had produced something that was now, in this moment, doing exactly what it was built to do. Wol-yeong had both hands near the running engine, not touching it, hovering, the hands of someone who had spent months fitting a plunger to a bore by feel alone, whose fingers knew the surface of that cylinder better than any gauge had measured it. Tears were running down her face, and she did not appear to notice. My plunger's holding, sealing true at every stroke, not a drop past it, just like my fingers promised. It's running on a fit nobody could measure, on my hands, the thing they threw in a river. My hands are in the heart of the thing that's going to free us all. Baek Dae-ho was laughing, the deep rolling laugh of a man who had spent 4 decades in front of a forge, and understood in his body what it meant for steel to survive, what this engine was doing to it.
My steel's taking it! Bombed 1,000 times a minute and not a crack. 40 years of fire and I never made anything that lived before.
Hyo-eun-ha stood with her eyes on the engine, and her expression was the closest thing to radiance Do-jin had ever seen on her face, which was not a face given to radiance. The timing holds, 1,000 tiny miracles a minute, each on time. The mathematics lives, Han Do-jin. I drew it, and you forged it, and it lives. Do-jin looked at them, Cho's hands, Taeho's steel, Pyo's timing, Mok's linkages, all of it present in the running engine, all of it vindicated at once. He had thought, sometimes in the long middle years of the work, that he was building a machine. He understood now that he had been wrong about that. He had been the occasion, they had been the builders. Wang had not moved from his position near the line. His voice, when he spoke, was rough in a way that had nothing to do with the engine noise. Loudest, hottest, most dangerous thing we ever built. And look, everybody's behind the line. Everybody goes home tonight. He was quiet for a moment. We built this one right from the first bolt. I couldn't give that to Gil. I could give it to every one of them. That's his, that is. The whole and home of all these people. That's Gil's, and they'll never know it, and that's all right. Do-jin had known this was coming. He had thought about how to answer it, in the abstract, in the months since Gil's death, and now that the moment was here he found that the answer was simpler than anything he had prepared. They'll never know it. We will. He's in this engine too, Gwang, in the part that didn't kill anybody. That part's the biggest part. Gwang said nothing. He nodded once, which was enough. Yunserin waited until the engine had been running long enough that the number was stable, and then she read it aloud with the flat precision she brought to every figure, as if the magnitude of what she was saying was the number's business and not hers. Here is the number, and you should all sit down for it. For it's wet, This little engine makes nearly 5 times the work the steam engine does. 5 times. No boiler, no water. Lights its own fire, drinks fuel we grow or dig. By the numbers, and I only deal in numbers, there is no longer any reason this cannot sit under a wagon and carry itself, and a family, and a load. Anywhere on earth there's ground to roll on. Hyun-ha turned the number over in the way she turned all numbers over, looking for its shape. That is not an improvement on the steam engine. That is a different kind of thing. The steam engine moved the frontier's freight. This one will move the frontier's people, each of them wherever they choose. The age of standing still is over. Do-jin heard it and knew it was true and felt, alongside the truth of it, the weight of everything that remained. Because Makjae was already crouched beside the engine with a lamp held close to the exhaust valve, and his expression was not the expression of a man celebrating. She ran hot. Mok set the lamp down and straightened, turning the scorched valve in his hands. This valve's edge is scorched, and that bearing was near smoking. An hour of life, and she's already worn like this. She runs. She doesn't last. Not yet. A daughter town would burn this engine up in a season. It was the correct observation. Do-jin did not wish it were otherwise. And that's the next mountain, Mok, the biggest one left. Anyone can make an engine that fires once, gloriously, and dies. The whole art is one that fires for 10,000 hours, and a fool can fix it with a wrench in a field. It runs, was today. It lasts, and anyone can mend it. That's the war we haven't won yet. But God, look what's possible now. We'll take it. Mok looked at the valve for another moment, then set it down carefully on the workbench, in the way of someone who intends to come back to a problem and wants to know where he left it. Cho-young had been thinking while Mok spoke, and when she spoke her voice had a quality Do-jin recognized, the voice of someone who has followed a thought all the way to its end and is now simply reporting what they found there. It's small enough to go under a wagon. It makes its own fire. It eats what we grow. It needs no rail and no river and no God. A family could put this under a cart and just leave, carry everything they own over a mountain the old roads never crossed, and not ask one soul's leave. We didn't build an engine. We built the end of being stuck, the end of having to stay where the magic let you live. Do-jin had been thinking the same thing in the back of his mind for longer than he had admitted to himself. He said it now because it needed to be said plainly, and because the people around him had earned the plainness. For 10,000 years where people could live was decided for them, by the river, the road, the warded land, the mandate. This little fire hands that decision back to anybody forever. It's the most dangerous thing we've ever made because it's the most freeing, and the two have always been the same thing. The Empire is going to understand that before the week's out, and they're going to be right to be afraid. Wol-yeong had been standing at the edge of the gathering, not apart from it exactly, but slightly removed, the way she always stood, as if she were already in the next conversation and was waiting politely for the current one to catch up. When the noise had settled enough, she spoke. I'll not spoil your day, it's earned, but hear me before you sleep. She looked at the engine, then at Do-jin. The thing you proved today can't be unproved, and word of it will outrun any guard we post. By the time the snow melts, the whole empire will know Iron Ridge has built a power that needs no road and no master and answers to no throne. An empire whose own mandate is dying does not negotiate with the thing that proves it obsolete. It tries to kill it in the cradle. The race I warned you of at the Iron Road just entered its last mile. Build the wheels, arm the towns. They're coming, sooner than the engine can be made to last. The engine ran on behind her words, steady and indifferent, its rhythm unchanged. Do-jin looked at Wol-yeong for a long moment. Then he looked at the engine, then back at her. Then the engine that frees us has to also help us survive the people who can't allow us to be free. All right, Wol-yeong, the little fire lives. Now we make sure why do. What do you need from the works to hold this frontier? The crowd thinned slowly. The way crowds thin after something that has used up all the available feeling, not unhappy, just emptied out in the good way, the way you feel after something has gone exactly as it needed to go, and there is nothing left to want from the moment. The engine was shut down and allowed to cool. Mok and Cho stayed to document the wear patterns. Seirin stayed to record the numbers in the register she kept for things that needed to be provable later. Do-jin stayed because he was not ready to leave yet. He put his hand on the cylinder head, which had cooled enough to touch. The iron was warm still, holding the memory of what it had done. He stood there in the oil lamp light, with the workshop quiet around him, and the veil's pale glow, somewhere above the roofline, guttering as it always guttered now. And he thought about the first time he had stood next to a running engine in his previous life, the one his grandfather had restored, a small single-cylinder thing that had sat in a corner of the shop for 2 years before they got it running. He had been 11 years old. He had thought then that it was the most alive thing he had ever seen. He thought so again now. He ran, he said quietly, to the cooling iron. In another life I'd have called that Tuesday. Here, after 4 years and everything it cost, here it's the day the world changed. He was quiet for a moment. No more walls, little fire, just road now. We make you last. We put you on wheels, and we carry these people out from under a dead God's sky to anywhere they choose. First we've got an empire to outlive. Rest up, we're both going to need it. He took his hand off the cylinder head and stood up straight. The lamp burned. Outside somewhere, the veil flickered against a sky that had never looked more like a deadline. He went to find Wol-yeong.